allow me to introduce you to the biggest villain that 007 ever faced.
Bond movies are going to have to approach the day when they're not shot on film anymore. That's going to happen. The manipulations that allows you now with dealing with digital technology are endless and effortless. And I think some of the stuff we're doing in this, in terms of the big stunt effect sequences, are only going to be a precursor to what is going to follow in the next generation of Bond movies. The high-end action sequences that are done for real are still going to exist, but I think that it's going to be half of them will exist for real and half of them will be augmented with. And sometimes they may move into entirely digital special effects that way.
With the start of the 21st century, I think the filmmakers were really searching for a definition of what a modern day Bond movie should be like and what techniques should be used in the process of filmmaking to keep things up to date. And a popular answer to that question seemed to be CGI. At least to Lee Tamahori, the director of the 20th Bond film that had the job to launch Bond into the millennium. And as he pointed out, authentic stunt work and action scenes are still gonna be there, but slowly but surely computers will take over and action scenes will be completely made out of digital effects. Remember how in the past 19 Bond films we've had some absolute mind-blowing stunt sequences and action scenes that took our breath away because they were done for real? Well, it's time to honor those 19 films now with Bond's 40th anniversary in a 20th Bond film using the power of computer-generated graphics. Enter Die Another Day.
It's an interesting position to be in now because having done 3 movies and then coming to the 4th, there's a certain kind of confidence and relaxation that comes with that.
So in 2002, Brosnan returned as 007 for the 4th time in Die Another Day, more confident and determined than ever to make sure this was going to be a fantastic Bond film. And this one was a big deal. Not only was this the 20th Bond film in the official Eon series, but it had also been exactly 40 years since Bond first made his introduction to cinema in Dr. No. Now, I have already foreshadowed that this film features a bit more CGI than we are used to from the past 19 Bond films, so let's just dive right into it. Now, if you have a good eye, you may just be able to notice that CGI is already used a bit more straight from the gun barrel. Did you catch it? Because it's really subtle. The film opens up in North Korea with a pretty impressive surfing sequence that is actually done for real. We see that Bond is one of the surfers as he takes off his wetsuit to reveal perfectly dry clothes, an obvious homage to the opening of Goldfinger. Since this film marks the 40th anniversary, the filmmakers decided to incorporate nods to all the past 19 Bond films in some way or another. And don't worry, I'm not planning on pointing them all out, since that would make for a completely separate video in its own right. Anyway, Bond soon steals the identity of an arms dealer and rigs a suitcase that is filled with diamonds with some explosives. He arrives at a North Korean army base where he is about to have an exchange with a certain Colonel Moon, an obvious nod to the novel Colonel Sun. And there's also his henchman, Zhao, who is played by Rick June. Colonel Moon wants to illegally trade some high-tech weaponry in exchange for the diamonds. Things all seem to go according to plan until Zhao gets a message from an unknown contact in the West informing him that Bond is a British agent. So Moon blows up Bond's helicopter and Bond is left to be killed. And for whatever reason, this guy is still checking out the diamonds and doesn't give a shit about all the explosions that just went off around him. So Bond activates the explosives in the suitcase to make an escape, and the diamonds get embedded in Zhao's face in the process. So soon we're launched into a hovercraft chase through a minefield featuring lots of shooting and explosions, and it's all just decent. Hovercrafts had never been used before in a Bond film, and growing up playing Diddy Kong Racing, what I liked best about the hovercrafts in the game was the fact that these things can float over, both water and land. They're pretty exciting vehicles that could make for some great action sequences. But instead, they're not really used to float over any actual rivers or lakes. It's mainly Bond following a muddy road, occasionally shooting some mines. Again, it's all not bad, but not nearly as memorable as the pre-title sequence in the previous film. Bond ends up on Moon's hovercraft, where a fight ensues with some pretty bad green screen effects, and has Bond dramatically dodging a flamethrower until the hovercraft reaches the end of the line and Moon ends up falling to his doom in a waterfall, and Bond ends up surviving.
Saved by the bell.
Moon's father, General Moon, appears, and I always liked how he goes, "My son is dead." And Bond is just casually nodding around like, yeah, no, absolutely. Dude fired a flamethrower at me. So with that, Bond is captured and becomes a prisoner that ends up being tortured for months as we are launched into the title sequence. It's pretty inspiring and something we haven't really seen before, because for the first time the titles show the actual story going along as we see Bond getting tortured by the Scorpions and being beaten up along with some dancing chicks made out of ice and fire. It's all quite different. The only thing that ruins it for me is Madonna's terrible title song. I mean, I'm not claiming other Bond title songs have lyrics that make any sense, but this... I just never got it. So Bond has been tortured for 14 months and now has long hair, a beard, and probably befriended a volleyball named Wilson. Again, we've never seen Bond quite in a state like this, and things really start off inspiring. After all this time, Bond never gave away any information and would rather die in prison than to compromise his government. The film now makes it seem like Bond's execution is about to take place as he has to start walking, but it turns out he's actually being traded for Zhao instead, who for whatever reason still hasn't bothered to take out the freaking diamonds in his face after 14 months. Bond gets taken aboard an MI6 ship where he soon meets up with M, who's not happy to see him at all. It is suspected that Bond leaked information during torture, and thus they had to get him out of there and trade him for Zhao, who had already killed 3 Chinese agents in the past months and is now a potential danger to the world. Bond's freedom came for a high price. Of course, Bond never leaked any information and was once again betrayed by that unknown source. Bond's 00 status gets revoked and he's left.
You're no use to anyone now.
And again, the setup to the plot starts off really inspiring. We're left wondering who betrayed Bond and how Bond is going to act without his 00 status. As Bond falls asleep, he begins to have some nightmares reflecting back to his 14 months of torture. This causes a heart failure which Bond uses to his advantage to escape as soon as he's revived by the nurses. It's a really elaborate escape. It's not a coincidence that it's caused by his nightmares. We're clearly shown that Bond has planned this out and he gets away with it easily. Bond soon jumps overboard and swims ashore in Hong Kong. I always like the next bit where Bond just casually walks into a 5-star hotel looking like he owns the place and not giving a crap. It's great. Of course, Bond happens to know people everywhere around the world, so he gets a suite along with some of the best clothes from his tailor, has a shave, and apparently is able to cut his hair with it too. And with that shave, his 14 months of torture are completely forgotten. Which actually is a real shame. All the potential repercussions on the character that could be explored here are just ignored. And we're back to the cardboard Bond that Brosnan usually is forced to play with the scripts he gets. Even Brosnan himself recognized the problems and admitted that he thought it was a real shame. Bond soon learns from a Chinese agent that Zhao is located in Cuba, so Bond proceeds his vendetta there.
Very handsome.
So Bond is a rogue agent now, but unlike when that happened in License to Kill, Bond really doesn't do anything different compared to being on an official mission for MI6. He just meets up with a Fidel Castro looking contact, asks for help and gets the information he needs. Which is that Zhao is currently in a clinic on a nearby island. There's a nice subtle little reference as Bond picks up a field guide to the Birds of the West Indies, which was the book that Fleming got the name James Bond from. But it's really one of the few moments a reference in a movie is actually subtle instead of being straight in your face. Bond also receives a gun, some binoculars and a car and is soon on his way. As Bond takes a look at the island where Zhao is currently located, we are soon introduced to our main Bond girl, Jacinta Johnson, aka Jinx, played by Halle Berry, whose entry is another example of the not so subtle references to a past film. I was never too bothered by this homage though. Honey Riders emerging from the ocean still is one of the most iconic scenes in the series, and Halle Berry has a pretty sick body to pull it off, and she looks great in that bikini too, so I'm not complaining. What I am bothered about though is all the dialogue following between her and Bond. I mean, Jinx literally just looks at Bond's penis and says this.
Wow. Now there's a mouthful.
And Bond is also far from subtle in trying to signal that he wants to bang her.
Nothing to see till the morning. Not out there, anyway.
So what do predators do when they see us?
They feast. Like there's no tomorrow.
But then again, the poor guy hasn't had sex in over 14 months, so I guess he's not even able to be witty about it anymore and just wants to get it over with. We're even shown how the pair are hitting it off in the next scene, you know, visually. I guess that's a first for the series. So if someone ever wanted to see Bond and a chick having an orgasm in one of these films, then, well, here it is. The next morning, Bond finds out that Jinx is making her way over to the island with the clinic too, and Bond just punches some random guy in a hotel into a wheelchair to gain access to the island, which I always liked. Jinx has a meeting with Dr. Alvarez, and it's explained how on the island he's responsible for changing people's genes and is literally able to switch up someone's race. And Zhao is currently undergoing this therapy and is now midway through to being transformed from an Asian man to a Caucasian German. And yet he still has the freaking diamonds in his head. If you want to change your look not to be recognized, you would think it would be, you know, step 1 to get rid of the most prominent thing you are recognized with. So Jinx is still talking to the guy who invented this when all of a sudden you realize her boobs look 3 times bigger here than they did in the previous scene. So Jinx is still talking to the guy who invented this when all of a sudden she kills him and we learn that she's an American secret agent who's also after Zhao. Bond meanwhile finds his way over to the Michael Jackson transformation machine that Zhao is hanging out in, and a pretty terribly edited fight follows. Bond sniffs Zhao's necklace off, who soon manages to make an escape. Jinx also tries to stop him but fails, so Zhao gets away in a helicopter and Jinx makes a CGI escape. And the guards really don't seem to care that a strange man with a gun is standing right next to them. They just run off. Let's tell Juan we just saw a hot chick in a bikini, man. It is revealed that Bond took some diamonds from the necklace that Zhao carried. Okay, so I guess he did already take a few of the diamonds out of his face then. These diamonds lead Bond to the main villain of the movie, Gustav Graves, someone who recently turned from zero to hero because he apparently discovered diamonds in Iceland, even though those diamonds are identical to African conflict diamonds.
What an amazing coincidence.
So Bond soon flies back to London, has a brief encounter with Roger Moore's daughter aboard of the plane, and we're introduced to this Gustav Graves as he's parachuting down in another obvious reference to The Spy Who Loved Me. Graves is played by Toby Stephens and is depicted as a public hero, someone who never sleeps, is full of adventure and is about to unveil one of the biggest projects to the world. It's kinda similar to Hugo Drax as he was depicted in the Moonraker novel. Speaking of that novel, Bond visits a fencing club called Blades in the next scene, which is a direct reference. It's here where Madonna has her completely unnecessary cameo and Bond utters some more laughably bad dialogue.
I see you handle your weapon well.
I have been known to keep my tip up.
We're also introduced to Miranda Frost, played by Rosamund Pike, debuting in her first film here and has done much better work ever since. Bond soon shows off some of Graves' diamonds to get his attention, and the pair engage in a pretty impressive sword fight after starting with an innocent game of fencing. And this honestly is the best fight in the film, and probably one of the best scenes too. Both Stephens and Brosnan really go at it. It's genuinely thrilling to see them handle these weapons. And thank God it's not ruined by the terribly slowing down and speeding up effects that a lot of the film's editing does consist of. Bond beats Graves and he gets an invitation to Graves' big launch party in Iceland where he's about to reveal a major life-changing invention. Then Bond receives a key that takes him to an abandoned subway station where he meets up with M again. Bond brings her up to speed with his inquiries and his 00 status gets reinstated, and never for a second did it feel like Bond was an actual rogue agent during this film. Unlike License to Kill, where Bond really had to use his wits to reach his objective and fight off MI6 operatives who tried to stop him along the way. Heck, in this film Bond just freely roams around in London and MI6 doesn't seem to give a crap. But yeah, the whole rogue thing gets dropped anyway and Bond is back in the service. The film takes a sudden dark turn back in the office where Bond finds Moneypenny murdered and M's chief of staff being shot by a bunch of bad guys who are holding M hostage. It really comes out of left field. Of course, it all turns out to be just a virtual reality game Bond is testing out in Q's lab that had ridiculously convincing graphics. John Cleese, who was previously introduced as Q's new assistant, now takes over as Desmond Llewellyn's successor, and he does a fine job playing it as expected.
There's always an excuse, isn't there, 000?
You know, you're cleverer than you look.
Still better than looking cleverer than you are. Follow me, please.
Again, it's thrown in our face that we're watching an anniversary Bond film here, as the whole room is filled with callbacks of previous gadgets. The jetpack from Thunderball, the crocodile submarine from Octopussy, and even Rosa Clapp's shoe. Bond receives a gadget ring capable of destroying glass, which he better switch off when sipping martinis, and he also gets his most notorious gadget car in the entire series.
Your new transportation.
Maybe you've been down here too long.
Aston Martin call it the Vanquish, we call it the Vanish.
Oh, very good.
It is here where the film takes a 180 degrees turn in its tone from a dark and gritty start into straight up sci-fi ridiculousness. Bond gets an invisible car. I do really like that they finally returned to an Aston Martin, and a beautiful one at that, after all those stupid years of Bond driving a BMW in the 90s. But still, this one turns invisible. But the film does try to rationalize the explanation for it.
Adaptive camouflage. Tiny cameras on all sides project the image they see onto a light-emitting polymer skin on the opposite side. You see, to the casual eye, it's as good as invisible.
But it still really pushes things way overboard. There was an episode of Top Gear where they attempted to test the idea behind this technology in their own way, which was pretty hilarious. So apparently it is based on some real-life cloaking device technology that the army was testing out or something, so you know what, let's just say that we roll with it. Bond is going to Iceland next, a place that is filled up with snow. He will be leaving freaking tire tracks. What's the point of being invisible there? That's like taking Bond's Lotus Esprit submarine to the desert. What's the point? But anyway, I did always like this little part though.
Target-seeking shotguns to shoot down mobile objects. Why don't you acquaint yourself with the manuals? You'll be able to shoot through that in a couple of hours.
Just took a few seconds, Q.
Wish I could make you vanish.
Miranda Frost is revealed to be working for MI6 too, and has been undercover trying to find out more about Graves for a few months now. She will also be sent out to Iceland to aid Bond on his mission. And oh boy, it's from the scenes in Iceland onwards where the movie is about to enter the Matrix. Proceed watching this film from here on in at your own risk. I mean, these shots in the movie seriously make it seem like you're accidentally sitting on the fast forward button of your remote. Bond arrives at Graves' ice palace, who makes an entry in a rocket car as if he's Captain Falcon from frickin' F-Zero. So we're dropped into some more pointless and terrible dialogue. Speaking of which, Jinx arrives too to join in on that. Graves reveals his big invention to the crowd, a satellite called Icarus that is capable of serving as a second sun that could bring light to any given location within a matter of seconds. It is revealed to us that Zhao, who now really looks like he would be more suitable to be a Star Wars villain, is working with Graves, because Graves is actually Colonel Moon from the start of the film, who apparently survived the fall down from the waterfall and also visited the Michael Jackson race-changing machine and now assumed this new identity. And it makes you realize that he got this entire operation done during the 14 months that Bond was being tortured. So he became a world icon that everybody loves, learned to speak perfect British, built an ice palace in Iceland, designed a satellite and launched that into space, and changed his genes all in just a little over a year. The plot is just stupid.
You are still feeling the side effects. The insomnia is permanent for me. An hour on the dream machine keeps me sane.
Okay, so Graves has never slept in these 14 months, but it's still pretty stupid. Meanwhile, Bond does some snooping around in his invisible car, which nobody notices. They neither see the tire tracks in the snow nor hear the car. I mean, have you ever heard a freaking V12 engine? It's not exactly a hybrid. Bond soon triggers the alarm and gets some guards after him, but he manages to stay safe by making out with Miranda. Now Graves knows exactly who Bond is. All his men know too. He's clearly the intruder that tried to get in, but better not disturb him when he's kissing a chick. Guess it's bro code. Miranda had previously told M that she would never sleep with other agents, especially not Bond, but we can all smell from miles away that she wants his D anyway, so Bond happily delivers. Jinx also attempts to infiltrate the facility, but is soon captured by Graves, who electrocutes her using his high-tech voltage glove. I mean, at this point you're really starting to wonder whether or not you're watching a Bond film or the Power Rangers. There's some more of those tacky slow-mo effects in the editing as Jinx gets taken to Zhao, who leaves her with Mr. Kill, another generic henchman in the film. Instead of just shooting her, Mr. Kill uses a laser, which is another obvious homage to Goldfinger. The only difference being we were at the edge of our seat in that scene, and here there's no tension whatsoever. I mean, Bond just casually gets dressed and makes his way over to her using his laser watch and has a swim underwater, infiltrates the facility, and yet the laser is still just sitting there doing absolutely nothing until Bond arrives. First time I heard this, I seriously thought that the dude was feeding her his little Mr. Kill or something, but no, it's just her moaning from the laser that doesn't even move. So Bond switches it off and a fight with Mr. Kill with a bunch of lasers surrounding them follows, and it's just terrible. Mr. Kill gets killed with a laser penetrating his mouth, and Bond learns that Gustav is actually Colonel Moon, because Zhao and the gene-changing machine are also there. Not sure how that makes him realize it, but whatever, the plot advances. Bond tells Jinx to quickly get Miranda, and Bond confronts Graves.
So you live to die another day.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
It's here that we learn that Miranda was the contact in the West who had betrayed Bond in North Korea and is on Graves' side. Bond immediately wants to shoot her, which would have been one of the most badass kills in the series, but he finds out Miranda has emptied his gun when she was sleeping with him. You would think that the world's best secret agent would notice the difference in Wade walking around with an empty gun this whole time, but no, he doesn't. Fortunately, Bond has his gadget ring and manages to escape. He gets into Graves' F-Zero rocket car and Graves uses the Icarus satellite to fire a freaking solar laser CGI beam from the sky. Bond is cornered to the edge of a glacier and the giant laser is used to kill Bond. And then we're brought to CGI heaven. I mean, this has to be the most embarrassing and ridiculous moment in the entire series. It's not only completely fake looking, especially after opening the film with a surfing scene that was actually done for real, but it's also just completely laughable to have Bond windsurfing on a freaking tsunami.
The way that we were going to use both the water and the ice was totally different and new and quite cutting edge, especially for a Bond film. You know, Bond films obviously have the reputation for doing as much as possible, absolutely for real. And this suddenly was an environment that we were going to create that was totally synthetic.
Yeah, totally synthetic, alright. There's no one that's not going to notice how fake this looked. This stuff was already aged as soon as they released the film. Even Brosnan himself would later reflect back on this and laugh his ass off to the scene.
Right, Brosnan, we're going to do kite surfing. Tsunamis today. Kite surfing, a tsunami.
So Bond survives in that way, and Jinx manages to get herself captured again. Bond gets back into his invisible car, but is soon noticed because one of Graves' goons accidentally runs into it on a snowmobile. This brings us into by far the best scene in Iceland, the car chase on ice. Zhao is chasing down Bond in his very own gadget-laden Jaguar, and it's nice to see the villains drive a car filled with gadgets for a change too. I always found it amusing how Zhao needs the thermal vision to spot Bond's car, even though he could literally just follow the tire tracks in the snow in the beginning. What's great about this scene is, although some CGI is used again, a lot of it is just done for real. Remember that? Something the past 19 Bond films did all the time? Ah, the 20th century. Simpler times. I mean, watching this is just so much more thrilling than a full-on computer-generated tsunami surfing scene will ever be. The cars fire rockets at each other, machine guns, mines, and Bond even uses his ejector seat to dodge one of Zhao's missiles, and I'm not exactly sure how that would work, but it still makes for a pretty cool impressive shot. Meanwhile, Graves fires his space laser on his own ice palace in which Jinx is still trapped. For whatever reason, she can't just swim out. Shouldn't the whole place just, melt away from the space laser? And besides, water is clearly coming into the room from somewhere too. But yeah, whatever. Bond soon drives into the place while still being chased down by Zhao and tricks him by activating his cloaking device at the very last second. So Zhao ends up meeting his doom by having an ice chandelier being dropped on top of him. Bond soon rushes over to Jinx, gets her out of the room and tries to revive her in some hot water.
Come on, it's warm in here. Come on. The cold kept you alive. Huh? Must have kept you alive. Come on.
What took you so long?
And I think the filmmakers were intending to make this an emotional scene and such, but it really isn't. Meanwhile, Graves has installed himself in a cargo plane flying over North Korea and is planning to use his satellite to cut a path through the Korean demilitarized zone so that they can invade South Korea. And it really makes you wonder why Graves went through all that trouble to build an ice palace and become a public hero to reveal this great satellite to a crowd, if he's just going to destroy the palace the next day anyway and is planning to start a world war with it. It all seems a bit pointless. Graves is now wearing this futuristic sci-fi suit that fans always refer to as the RoboCop suit. It's really ridiculous. Graves' father is brought back too, and Graves tries to bring him in on his diabolical plan to invade South Korea, but the father realizes that this will cause a nuclear war with the Americans, so RoboCop just electrocutes him and kills him off, which again is probably meant to be an emotional scene, but it really isn't. So Bond and Jinx team up again and try to stop Graves. And by the way, Michael Madsen is in this too, playing Jinx's superior, but doesn't really bring much to the table. So yeah, there's that. After some more CGI flying into North Korea, Bond and Jinx infiltrate the cargo plane. Bond ends up accidentally shooting one of the plane's windows, again another reference to Goldfinger, and the whole plane starts going down. Graves' laser satellite destroying the demilitarized zone is also extremely nearby, but only gives the plane a few scratches. Jinx ends up in a sword fight with Miranda, who is wearing an outfit which really doesn't seem appropriate for this. But it looks pretty hot, so she gets away with it. Jinx does some stunts that Halle Berry could never pull off, but thanks to some fancy editing tricks she totally can, and she ends up beating the Olympic fencing champion Miranda.
I can read your every move. Read this, bitch.
Bond is meanwhile fighting RoboCop and gets electrocuted a little bit, while we are constantly being reminded that the CGI plane is going down during the fight, in an attempt to put us on the edge of our seat. But really though, by the time you get to this climax, you really don't care that much anymore about all the random crap the film throws at you anyway, since the believability of it all was just blown straight out of the window a long time ago, and you're usually just happy when all of this nonsense is over. So in the end, Bond ends up beating Graves by pulling out his parachute.
Time to face gravity!
And since the RoboCop suit is somehow connected to the laser satellite, the beam stops and the world is saved. Now Bond and Jinx still need to make their escape. Of course, like all escapes in the film, the power of CGI is used again, and Bond and Jinx get into a helicopter in the back of the cargo plane, and with some more clunky effects manage to fire it up in mid-air and survive. Conveniently, the helicopter also holds all of Graves' diamonds, and I can't even remember why he wanted to use the diamonds in the first place, but at this point of the film, I usually don't care about it anymore either. Oddly enough, the film ends with Moneypenny finally fulfilling her dreams by making out with 007 and is about to have sex with him. But of course it turns out that she's just masturbating with Q's virtual reality glasses on. Maybe some people will like that whole thing, but yeah, I'm not a fan. As if we haven't had enough nonsense in this film already. Of course, Bond is actually out in some secluded area banging Jinx on top of a pile of diamonds, and the cut that was clearly made in her stomach during the fight with Miranda before has now magically disappeared, and the film ends on probably the most cringeworthy note for any Bond actor to end his tenure on.
So good.
Especially when you're bad.
Poor Brosnan, he just really deserved a better send-off. Die Another Day is notoriously known among fans to be among the worst Bond films in the series, and you may have noticed I'm not exactly a fan who's going to claim otherwise. I don't know whether director Lee Tamahori is to blame with his weird vision, or the script, or the belief that complete full-on CGI scenes were the right direction to take the next generation of Bond films in, but the end result was another film in the franchise where things just went completely overboard. Surfing a computer-generated tsunami, an invisible car, huge lasers just falling from the sky, villains who look like they walked straight out of a sci-fi film, electrocuting people in a RoboCop suit, terrible dialogue, clunky slow-mo editing, Madonna, and a shitload of CGI. A lot of the worst moments of the film take place from the Iceland scenes onwards though, because the first half of the movie is actually not that bad. As a matter of fact, it starts off extremely promising with Bond's torture in North Korea and the realistic tone that went with him trying to track down the person that betrayed him. I honestly really enjoyed the first half of the film. During the Cuba scenes it already sinks in a little bit, but not to a terrible degree. But once the film passes the halfway point, it just goes berserk and everything is thrown out of the window. And with a movie that has a script like this, with all these CGI effects thrown in and so much terrible dialogue, none of the actors could have really saved this movie from all that. No matter how hard they would have tried, they were just doomed from the start. Ironically, both Bond girls would end up in sequels to Bond spoofs down the line, with Rosamund Pike starring in Johnny English Reborn and Halle Berry in the upcoming Kingsman: The Golden Circle. I guess it goes to show that at the very least these two were remembered and associated with the genre, which is definitely something I give credit for to Die Another Day. The film is extremely memorable. You decide whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. But one thing was certain, the series reached an all-time low with its 40th anniversary, and some desperate and radical changes were needed if it were to ever proudly thrive in its glory again like it had done in the past. So, do you enjoy watching my recapping episodes and you just can't wait for the next one or other content coming up to my channel? Well, go support me on Patreon, become part of my community and get access to all my latest videos 2 weeks before the regular viewers get to see it, as well as access to a lot of awesome supporter rewards like having monthly Skype calls with me. You can find the link in the description and make sure you subscribe to my channel.